Hi, I'm Juliet.
And I'm Peter.
And I'm a licensed therapist.
And I never have to watch Monk again.
And this is Intrusive Plots, a podcast about OCD in film and TV. Welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
What's up, Juliet? How you doing?
You know, Peter, do you ever just go on a first date and shortly after you realize that you are the animal that is being hunted and you're at a hunting range and then you just get shot and killed along with your two children?
Is that what it's like on the apps now? I haven't been dating in a long time.
Likewise. But, you know, that is how dating works in the movie that we're talking about today, which is The House That Jack Built. That's my intro segment.
When I was editing the Monk episode, I realized that my audio levels peaked a lot because I was laughing too hard. So when I laugh hard, I'm going to try and lean back a little bit.
Oh. It's the opposite of leaning in. Like,
yes.
Lean into the anxiety, lean back.
From the microphone.
So I'm doing very well. I'm really excited to talk about this movie. How are you today, Peter?
I don't know, because, like, as a film person, everyone knows about Lars Von Trier. And if you're not a film person, Lars Von Trier is a Danish film director and screenwriter. He's kind of known for being the edgy kid in the high school class to make movies to push the button for the sake of pushing buttons, which is... How do I put this? That's not everyone's view of Lars Von Trier. He has also done interesting things, like he invented this thing called the Dogma 95, which was this kind of vow of chastity in the film world from studio influence by making each director swear by a certain number of rules, and I'll list some of them for you. Shooting must be done on location. The sound must never be produced apart from the images or vice versa. The camera must be handheld. The film must not contain superficial action. Murders, weapons must not occur. Genre movies are not acceptable. And it makes the director kind of swear to refrain from personal taste and not credit themselves. It was an entire movement made by these like artsy little directors to kind of quote unquote take back the power from the studio. So
Inspiring.
There was some stuff that was interesting that he did back in the 90s, and then a lot of directors have fallen suit by doing that. I am pleased to say that The House That Jack Built is not a Dogma 95 film because there is a lot of superficial murder in this movie. So
why don't you give us the synopsis and then we can get into it, because Peter and I we did a watch party last night. We watched this together.
We did do another watch party. Again, I'm extremely happy I did not watch this by myself. God. Number one, it is very long. Number two, there are some moments that you couldn't describe to another person if you tried. We're going to do our best on this podcast.
We sure will.
The House That Jack Built is a 2018 psychological horror art film written and directed by Lars Von Trier. It stars Matt Dillon, most known for You, Me, and Dupree. That's not in the Wikipedia, that's just what I know him from. And a long list of other people. Its plot follows Jack, a serial killer who, over a 12-year period from the late 1970s into the 1980s, they don't make that very clear.
They do not.
They show like an old phone once. Commits numerous murders in the U.S. state of Washington. Utilizing Dante's Inferno as a metatext, the film is structured as a series of flashback vignettes relayed by Jack to the Roman poet Virgil, during which Jack attempts to make an argument for his crimes. And it's also about OCD.
Yes. And believe it or not, there is some OCD advocacy and OCD
we'll get to that
in this movie. Yes,
I promise you, we will get to his. If he doesn't have an Instagram raking in those followers and real shares, he's going to soon. So the name The House That Jack Built comes from a nursery rhyme. It's like one of those things where it's like, and the house that Jack built, and then you start adding things onto the list, and however many you can remember is however far you get in the nursery rhyme. Yeah, it's cute. You can Google it. This is the second film we reviewed that involves a serial killer with OCD, so that's kind of where we're at with that.
Yeah, so in this film, we definitely have a dual diagnosis happening where Jack talks openly about his experiences with OCD, really only for the first 30 minutes of the film, and then it's kind of a very moot point. But he also, is demonstrating antisocial personality disorder or sociopathy, and so he's got lots of things going on here.
Now, before we crack open the plot, Juliet raised an important issue to me that we should talk about, how Lars Von Trier likes being a little edgelord. Do you want to give the 2011 spiel?
Of course. First of all, I want to say that I learned what the term edgelord means last night.
I thought every millennial knew what edgelord meant. I mean, if that's not the case.
For those of you who are listening who doesn't know what an edgelord is, it is a person who purposely will kind of push the limits on things to get a reaction out of someone. So with the film, we see a lot of that. Is that right?
I would say that's right. I would say many children go through an edgelord phase in high school, and Lars Von Trier happened to do it the entirety of his fucking life and career.
Yeah, so the 2011 incident, it's interesting I'm calling it an incident because that is what each section of this movie, there's the incident 1, incident 2. Anyway, at the Cannes Film Festival, Lars...
Wait, I have to cut you off. I might leave this in because that's hilarious. Cannes is a fast food restaurant. The Cannes Film Festival is in France. Oh. Wow, that's fucking awesome. All right, continue.
This whole time I'm like, yeah, at Cannes, the Cannes.
You want to show our movie at Raising Cane's? We'll get chicken sandwiches after.
I knew it sounded familiar, but so at the Cannes Film Festival.
The Cannes Film Festival.
Oh, fuck. The Cannes Film Festival. Lars was there for his movie Melancholia. And in an interview at this festival, this is a quote from Lars. He said, "I understand Hitler, but I think he did some wrong things, yes, absolutely. But I can see him sitting in his bunker in the end, ... And I think I understand the man. He's not what you would call a good guy, but I understand much about him. And I sympathize with him a little bit, yes." So that's really fucked up. We just want to put it out there, Hitler, we do not sympathize with Hitler.
The thing is, this is now a controversial topic in this country, but Nazis are indeed very bad.
They are very bad, and sympathizing with them is very bad. And looking at this movie now, knowing that he made this quote, some of the art choices he made as he was describing his murders, and then some of the ways he tried to justify atrocities in the world. We saw some clips of Hitler and Nazi Germany and some of the concentration camps.
Also other dictators mixed in too. We saw Mao, we saw Joseph Stalin. Yeah.
And according to Jack, he refers to these, this is a quote, rather, Jack refers to images of Hitler, Stalin, Mao, and other tyrants as supremely iconic and asserts that they and the image of them are beautiful art. What's more, he presents their crimes as iconic as well. And in a series of film clips that's dominated by images of the Holocaust, of survivors of Auschwitz in the barracks, of piles of bony corpses being bulldozed into mass graves, he calls these atrocities art, says that they're beautiful, and asserts that his own crimes should take their place in history alongside other so-called artworks. I just saw the life drain out of your eyes when I was reading that.
That's definitely an opinion. It's part of this art form that the most unbearable, awful people have a very large hand in making film the way we see it today. It's not just Lars Von Trier. It doesn't make this shit any less awful, offensive, and obnoxious. So before we crack open this doozy of a movie, we wanted to talk about that. We also should probably talk about the fact that as we go through this film, the way that this character looks at women is not the coolest, and yes. If you look back at his career, sometimes the way Lars treats the actresses on his set is not the coolest. I actually debated, hey, Juliet, do you want to do this movie? We could skip this one, we could go to Matchstick Men. And she was like, no, I really want to do it. And I'm going to be real. I think there's a lot of fun to be had with this ridiculous movie.
I do too. And I could also argue that I am a bit of an edgelord when it comes to the content of this podcast. And by me saying, yeah, let's do it, would that make me an edgelord, Peter?
I don't think that would put you in the same category as Lars Von Trier, but sure, you're learning, I guess.
There is a lot to unpack with this film. And as we've had our podcast and we've asked listeners if there are movies that they really want to see us review, this one has come up quite a few times.
Isn't that interesting? A weird,
yes.
2.5-hour art film?
So many people
can you guys cover the house that Jack built? Yeah.
Yes. So I'm really glad we did this, and I'm glad we will do this. So for those of you listening, and if you have not seen The House That Jack Built, but you are someone who has a hard time with gore and with very kind of like torture-esque imagery,
animal abuse,
hate crimes against women, you may not want to watch, but you can, watch or listen at your own discretion.
I was also talking to Juliet being like, hey, listen, like a lot of the mental health community they're not big into the extreme ends of the film spectrum, But for those that are, this is a podcast about OCD and film, and oh boy, do they talk about OCD in this movie.
They do. Shall we get into it, Peter?
Let's do it. Let's get into it.
Okay. Where do we even start?
We start with Uma Thurman.
Oh, yes. So Uma Thurman makes an appearance in the first 10 minutes of this movie.
We can't actually start with Uma Thurman as much as we want to. It actually starts with a 30-second clip of black where we just hear two voices. Juliet actually asked me to pause and ask, are you also seeing just black? Yes, no, welcome to Lars Von Trier. But what we would later learn is that he is speaking to Verge, which is a nickname for Virgil, who is the character that leads Dante through all the levels of hell in the Divine Comedy. And if that sounds pretentious, you ain't seen nothing yet. So, after that, we cut into good old Jack driving his car and sees a woman that on the side of the road that needs some help. Juliet, would you like to continue?
It's Uma. And
it's Uma.
She's like, do you have a Jack? Is the first thing she says to him. And he is not super interested. He's like, no, I don't. And she's like, what kind of man doesn't have a Jack in his car? And he says, not me. And she proceeds to kind of push his buttons a little bit. I suppose from his perspective, maybe she's annoying because she asks him to drive her up the road to the mechanic shop. And while they're in the car, she proceeds to say, oh, if you were a murderer, you could really easily murder me right now.
Okay. Everyone that goes and buys a ticket to see The House that Jack Built knows they're seeing a movie about a serial killer. I think it's actually a fun thing that directors do. They kind of dangle the concept of the film in front of you a little bit, and it makes for some good fake-outs in the first act and all that fun stuff. We come to learn that he wasn't actually a serial killer at that moment. His first kill was the lady that kept saying, oh my God, you look like a serial killer. Oh my God, you shouldn't have picked me up. Why am I even here? And it seemed like from this film, literally Uma Thurman talks at him until he swings, I believe, a Jack that he picked up at the mechanic at her face.
Don't you hate it when people just push you to become a serial killer, Peter?
I literally looked at Juliet and asked her, have you ever annoyed a serial killer into killing you? And this is already so pretentious yet kind of hysterical. This whole thing is divided up into 5 incidents. We thought that was going to be 5 killings, but no, there were dozens of killings. These are just 5 specific killings.
And these are the ones that are quote unquote, when he's discussing with Verge, he's like, these are just some random killings that have happened throughout my serial killing career.
Yeah.
That, really stick in my mind. Like the greatest hits.
And in between each greatest hit, he talks about architecture versus being an engineer and art. And that's where we got some of the Hitler clips.
The Lion and the Lamb.
The Lion and the Lamb being, oh, it's my nature to be a predator and it's others' nature to be prey. And then it gets into some really...
Winery, grapes, how to preserve grapes.
When you said winery, I thought you meant just he was whining a lot. And I'm like, yeah, he is whining a lot. This is some intense winery. No, we're talking about cultivating wine.
Yes.
Anyway, so... this first chunk is the scene where he picks up Uma Thurman and Uma annoys him into killing her, which is Lars's first amazing statement about women in this movie. This follows, by the way, American Psycho rules, which I'm sure is a movie Lars thinks is just so cool for the definite reason they intended people to think it's cool. No effort is made to think through any of these killings, which is weird because he has OCD, which we'll get into.
Oh boy, will we get into that.
Oh boy, when we get into that. So, yes, Uma Thurman dies, and she remains a top billed cast member, but she's out of the movie. Which, that shit happens all the time. Right after Uma Thurman dies, we see our first introduction of him having OCD. We see some pencils lined up, and they whip out a word called I'm going to butcher this so hard. You know exactly what I'm going to try to say.
I believe in you.
Ordnungsfang.
Yes.
The German word for being orderly.
Yes. And he's talking about as a child, he was called Ordnungsfang. And then he was, plagued by compulsions. Then he goes to describe, I think, a pretty decent description of what it can feel like to have like contamination-related obsessions and compulsions. We both were like, oh, that was kind of good.
I think that was what surprised me the most about this film. Not that it was like an allegory for the Divine Comedy or whatever. The fact that parts of this are actually pretty decent at handling OCD. That was so weird and so bizarre. Again, I'm so happy we did this because had we not watched this movie, we would never know just how weirdly accurate some of the descriptions are in between all the Hitler stuff.
Yes, yes.
He's hysterical about cleaning, which is, he can't leave a room without cleaning. Those are more accurate than not. Granted, he talks about compulsively cleaning his crime scenes because he's worried he's going to get caught. That's just regular murder cleanup. I don't think there's anything really irrational about cleaning up your crime scene. You're the therapist. You want to weigh in on that?
I think where the line would be is if we take your average murderer and we ask ourselves, what are the standard guidelines for crime scene cleanup? And if someone is engaging in a behavior that is kind of standard, like wiping everything down, cleaning up the blood, and then leaving, I think that is totally, appropriate crime scene cleanup. But what we see with Jack is he does all of that. Then he goes into his van and then he starts having these, intrusive images, intrusive thoughts about what if I missed a spot? What if there's blood underneath the rug? What if there's blood underneath the picture frame? So we see him going back, doing it all again, and then going back to his car. And then this repeats quite a few times. So I think for him, he definitely is crossing the line into more of the compulsive behaviors. And though there is kind of a real perceived negative outcome that is true. Like, if you don't clean up after you murder someone, you could get caught.
Is this how you would explain it to Jack if he booked a session with you and you just sat him down and he's like, I just really think that there might be some splatter behind one of the picture frames, and what would you say? Would you say, yeah, this is true, we can hold space for it, but we can also ask ourselves, is it possible that we can sit with the discomfort that maybe you missed a few drops?
I love that. I think would encourage Jack to do a little bit of information seeking, reach out to the communities of people who are murdering people and ask, how do you usually, dispose of evidence? And then ask himself, okay, are the things I'm doing aligned with, the general guidelines, or are they possibly excessive?
Yeah, there really should be like a Patreon, like kind of like your Patreon, except like for a serial killer, and people would be like, hey, like, do you want to share any wins that you had today?
Okay, why do you think that Jack having OCD was part of this plot? Because as we'll talk about with the film, like, it was mentioned, the first like hour-ish, and then it really took a quite different turn, and OCD was just such a back burner.
It's because his treatment worked. We'll talk all about that. You're asking me to ask why in a Lars Von Trier movie.
Yeah, I am.
That's a tall order. So, rather than me trying to decode this movie, let's talk about the second incident. After the first incident, by the way, he disposes of Uma Thurman's body across state lines because he describes to Virgil, if I drop the body across state lines, it's out of the local police's jurisdiction and I'm home free. As if a murderer has never done that before, ever. As if he just, circumvented law enforcement in its entirety. Between that and the quote-unquote second incident, the second chapter of this movie, we see a bunch of... Well, I don't think we get into the Hitler shit just yet, but we do see a bunch of, descriptions of Gothic architecture and lots of slideshows of, old artworks and images, and I'm pretty sure I looked at Julia and go, what percentage of this movie is just slideshows and stock footage?
Images.
Yeah, stock footage.
I think 50. Honestly, they could have cut out that, and it would have been, it would be under 2 hours.
Is Lars Von Trier a genius in this way? Could I hit up my producer and be like, hey, you want to save a bunch of money on footage? There is so much Creative Commons public domain shit we can just throw into the movie. So, eventually, before the second incident starts, he gets this walk-in freezer. And the walk-in freezer is filled with nothing but frozen pizzas. and my heart sang a little bit because there's nothing that I'd rather want on a night that I can't cook or don't have time to cook than a shitty pizza. But he doesn't touch those pizzas. No, he does something very different with that walk-in freezer.
I bet you cannot guess what it is to our viewers. They're probably like, huh.
I wonder what he'll do with this freezer. This is also the second mention of dead bodies in freezers on the Intrusive Plots
if you
podcast.
know, you know.
If you know, you know. That's one for the fans. Okay, so now let's actually start talking about incident number 2. This is where Lars Von Trier trots out Matt Dillon as Jack in the American Psycho getup. He's like wearing like a tie and like an overcoat, and he's got him like wearing horn-rimmed glasses. And it's like, you understand that you're not supposed to think Patrick Bateman's like really cool, right? This movie kind of toes the line of, is this satire or is this what Lars really thinks? I can't tell.
One of the articles that was reviewing the film also said that, I forget what it was, but something about like, Lars would have played Jack if he had the ability to be an actor. This reviewer was like being pretty ruthless to him, but they were like, yeah, this is like, it would have been him playing himself if he could act.
There was an interview with Matt Dillon that I watched, and Matt Dillon said, "Why did you cast me?" And Lars Von Trier reportedly said, "Well, you've got a good face, and you're the person that looks most closely to me, and I'm pretty close to this character." And Matt Dillon in this interview was like, "I didn't know what to say to that, but, yeah."
Oh my God.
So, okay. I'm going to reference this Matt Dillon interview a couple times because there are some hysterical bits, but Jack shows up to the door of his next victim, and it is shot, I shit you not, like an episode of The Office, and he handles it like he's Michael Scott. And this happens for a long time.
It was like a 20-minute, just like crude cut back and forth.
It is so strange where he makes up really obvious lies and then doubles down on some lies but reveals that he wasn't telling the truth in others. I struggle to recommend this movie, but if you see this movie, you will know what I mean, where it's like, it's awkward, bumbling comedy, and it goes on for so long. And he first pretends to the woman that he's police but refuses to show a badge, and the woman's a moron, apparently, so she goes, "Oh, okay." And then he goes, "Haha, you got me, I'm not a cop, I'm actually an insurance agent." And the woman goes, "Oh, okay." And then he's like, "Can I come in?" And then eventually the woman's like, "Oh, okay." Yeah. I literally could not tell if he was doing a bit. His hand movements, his mannerisms made it look like he was doing some kind of Tim Robinson, I think you should leave bit. And then I joked that he was the Scranton Strangler.
Well, yeah, so then he strangles this woman. And
in the most awkward way imaginable.
He doesn't end up killing her. So then he starts crying. He's like, "I'm so sorry. What can I do? How can I help?" He comes in like, "Let me help you. Like, what do you need?" And she's like, "I can't talk." And he's like, "Oh, I know what will help you." And he pulls from his like coat this like thermos. He opens it. He pours a little bit of water into the like thermos cup. And then he's like, "Oh no, I got something else for you." And he pulls a donut out of his pocket and he crumples up parts of the donut into the water. She's like dying and he just pours it into her mouth. And then he kills her. And I said something like, what's worse than being strangled? Being strangled and being forced to drink like donut soggy water.
I wrote that down too. "Just kill me now, you're going to give me donut water." And Matt Dillon in that interview said, by the way, that was ad-libbed. There was a lot that was not in the script that happened, and that donut water scene was, that was straight from Matt Dillon.
Genius.
One thing that is important to note during this is that Lars did not have them rehearse at all.
No wonder it was so awkward.
Yes, it was so loose and awkward, and like that was a choice by Lars. There's like a Danish phrase that translates to "keep it messy." It's the idea that it like keeps it kind of real, kind of in line with the whole Dogma 95 thing. But Matt Dillon literally had to ask to rehearse certain scenes, saying, "Hey, I don't know how to do this, like...
I don't know how to cut this person's breast off. Can you help me?"
Spoilers. So a lot of this was just not rehearsed. That was a choice.
That makes so much sense.
And then, throughout the entirety of this awkward back and forth, and then suddenly an awkward strangle, and then an awkward donut force feeding, it goes from day to night, implying that this awkwardness went on for hours. I don't know if that was intentional, but if it was, that's actually genius.
I I kind of feel like that was just a miss.
I mean, I think it was too, but like, I like living in the world where he did a Michael Scott bit and made Michael Scott jokes for about 4 hours until the sun went down.
The donut scene was actually 2 hours long.
In real life, it takes a long time for people to die, especially if you're being sustained on donut water.
Yes.
I have written down, imagine sucking this hard at serial killing. Okay, now we've gotten to the OCD sign. So, end of incident 2. We get into a monologue about his personal problems, and the first thing we cut to... You ever go on Instagram and you see one of the OCD influencers like Juliet and like 10,000 other people holding a sign and making a face? I cannot change it any other way. That's what he did.
We will put the image in this. We'll like add this to it, or we'll put it on the gram. You'll see it.
It was a voiceover of him talking about OCD, holding a foam core board, frowning at the camera with the letters OCD on it.
Peter and I both looked at it. We looked at each other and we laughed, and then we paused it, and then Peter recreated the image.
I ran
himself.
around my house, searching for a Sharpie and a piece of paper or foam core that was the proper size. I had to go through a couple pieces of paper, but I needed to do this bit so badly. I made it in front of the screen and held up my OCD sign in solidarity with Jack.
With Jack.
Honestly, if we made an Instagram for all the moments that Jack stood on a soapbox about OCD, we could probably get a few thousand followers off of it.
Maybe more than this podcast.
Maybe more than this podcast.
We've been doing the wrong thing. We've been going at this from the wrong angle.
I swear to God, like, if you put that scene on mute and then played Green Day's It's Something Unpredictable, but in the end, like, if you do that, the scene would equally work. And the thing is, they cut into the next scene after that monologue where they're showing, like, the OCD stuff anyway. They did not need that fucking sign. They did not need that bit, but it's in there anyway.
That was the best part of the movie.
That was the best part of the movie. It reminded me of, okay, so when I was in film school, I did a PSA series raising awareness of adolescent suicide. And
that's really noble.
It was something that I felt and feel strongly about, but it was also very didactic. But it was also very on the nose and very, like, kind of corny, you know? And this made me think of that so much. But yeah, so that's incident 2.
He's also with the OCD sign too. I just want to mention, he's like leaning against his car, holding the OCD. It's giving kind of like at the end of any like 80s teen movie where like the boyfriend who's done wrong shows up holding a sign with the boombox below the person's window. It's like giving that.
Or in like Love Actually, to me,
Yes.
you are perfect.
Yes.
Oh, man. Okay,
So is it that after that scene we see him having all the intrusive thoughts about cleaning and about the murder scene?
Yes, it is after that bit when he's cleaning up.
Yes.
That's when we see him experiencing intrusive thoughts of him leaving blood behind. And this is where they show OCD in a way that's, we like kind of looked at each other like, are they actually trying? Is this actually kind of nice in a fucked up way?
It was really better than a lot of the OCD depictions. Like, in a lot of the movies we've talked about that have not done it right, this did a really good job of showing, like, the intensity of his intrusive thoughts that felt so real to him. He kept having to go back to clean, despite hearing police sirens, knowing that, like, someone was likely going to find him. He just still had to go complete his compulsions.
Yeah.
It was hard because we could see him getting, sidetracked from his values.
Of serial killing.
Yes, his value of freedom. He almost got caught because of this.
He almost got caught because his compulsions held him back. But what we're going to see throughout this podcast and this movie, if you just sit with the discomfort and you stick with that ick, then you can be a serial killer for as long as you want.
And your OCD might actually get better.
Your OCD might actually get better. It definitely does for Jack.
But before we go on to, I just want to read one more quote from the same review that was pretty ruthless about Lars's edgelord tendencies. But this also, I think, is pretty poignant. The author says, a similar touch of psychological insight arrives in the aftermath of a killing when Jack, admitting in voiceover his obsessive tendencies and compulsive cleanliness, imagines bloodstains in unlikely places in a victim's house and returns to the scene of the crime to examine those places, such as the wall behind the picture. There, Von Trier poignantly, if glancingly, suggests the torments that Jack endures as an element of his mental illness.
I mean, at least it's acknowledged.
Yes.
Let's talk about one of the exposure opportunities that we found for our boy. So he is trying to get rid of the body, and who shows up but the police? And the cop approaches him. This is another example of cops just being so useless in this world and the world of every movie that we've we've discussed. We're waiting for, there's a distress call or there's a wellness check or whatever. No, there was a robbery across the street that the cop was asking about and asked Jack if he heard or saw anything. Now, for the average person trying to get away with a heinous crime, I feel like this means that you're home free, but no, Jack ups the ante. Jack goes, "Did I see or hear anything? No, but guess what? The person I'm visiting is missing."
The person he just murdered.
The person he just murdered that he's claimed to visiting is also missing, and he's right there. And the cop goes, "Oh, okay, I didn't ask that." And then cop kind of picks up that something's off and asks to search Jack's house, or the house of the person he killed, not the house that he built, the house of the person that he killed. He has to sit with the discomfort that the cop might find blood drops that he didn't pick up. And you can't stop that. You just have to let it happen. And Juliet was proud.
Well, so then the cop says, "I think I'm going to go inside and, check it out." And Jack says, "Yeah, maybe she's in there. Maybe she's not."
Homie literally says maybe, maybe not. And I don't know if that was Lars giving the OCD community a wink, but that was mind-blowing to see. Maybe, maybe not. And they legit perform an exposure at the front door.
Yep.
And then they both make it in. And then he starts being annoying on purpose to get the cop to leave in some kind of reverse psychology.
But he's also checking the places where he thinks there still could be blood. He looks underneath the picture frame. He looks underneath the carpet again. He
does give in to his compulsions while the cop is still there.
Yes.
We should give him some grace for that, though. Not everyone's going to have a perfect record with their compulsions.
We're looking for progress over perfection.
Progress over perfection, and it's okay, Jack.
This might be a good time to explore what a therapy session could look like with Jack. If he came to me and
take it away.
If he told me that he was experiencing these intrusive thoughts, it was preventing him from, completing his work. And what are some of the ways, if someone was like a fly on a wall, how would I talk with him and how would we help him gain some more, freedom from his OCD? So I was thinking of a couple of non-engagement responses that I would probably encourage Jack to keep in his back pocket during these times.
Give me some of them NERs. Give me them NERs.
Yes. So the first one I think that would be good for Jack would be I might not be doing a perfect job at this and I could be leaving something behind. So instead of when he's having these thoughts, is there blood? I also just want to point out, non-engagement responses, not related. Every single time this man went back to check, he is putting his bare fingerprints all over the entire... He did not wear gloves once.
Juliet, OCD isn't rational.
It does not follow logic. You're right. I'm sorry. Thank you for checking me. So the first would be, it's impossible to be perfect. I'm doing the best I can, and I may have missed something. I think a good one also for him would just be maybe. Maybe there is blood spatter. Maybe, my DNA is at the scene. Maybe they will find me. Another thing would probably be this mistake will be, the thing that ends me. And I'm just going to have to, take it moment by moment and wait and see.
Wow. Inspiring stuff.
Thank you.
If he was doing really well, maybe he could take that a step further. What if he left an entire limb?
Oh, yes.
No way to know. Yeah.
Add some absurdity to it. Or maybe he, killed someone who had cameras.
Yeah.
And maybe he's on video. Also, he has a pseudonym.
Oh my God. An alias?
Alias. Why don't you tell our viewers what the alias is?
He has a serial killer name that he kind of gave himself. And this is what makes me think that this movie is a satire, but then I don't know. This movie keeps me on my toes. His fucking serial killer name is Mr. Sophistication. This man is a high schooler.
Well, another, just really quickly with the OCD piece, while he is kind of working, maybe with a therapist, maybe just with himself, to not take every single thought as a fact. We see him say, actually, that as he has more murders, he goes about his job, values over fear, his OCD actually becomes less intense, and he says it's liberating.
Yeah, he went towards his values, which was always the right decision to make. I'm sad that he's Washington-based and not Michigan-based. I think he would have gotten a lot out of coming to see you. Yeah, so this ends with the cop not seeing anything and being absolutely fucking useless. He wraps the body up, ties it on a rope to the back of his car, and then drags the body down the street, and the body smears against the asphalt like it's a Sharpie, and just a giant red line following the car.
So much for any blood spatter underneath the rug.
This is the same man that couldn't leave the house alone in case that there was blood splatter there. But no, there was a giant red pathway directly to where he is for any cops that wanted to see.
It literally leads straight to his freezer.
Straight to his freezer, straight to his hideout. And then he unwraps the body and the person's face is ground off. And I just wrote down Parmesan face.
I think this is the point where Jordan came in and I was like, do you want to watch?
Okay, my wife was at a party at that moment. She would have hated this movie so hard.
Neither of our spouses watched. We did this one on our own.
So at this point, the narrator, Verge, basically calls him out for everyone in the story being a dumbass. Like, oh, wow, this police officer is exceptionally naive. Why do you think that is? It's a hint towards him being an unreliable narrator and that there is a theory going around that the events of the film are just completely made up.
Well, that was a theory you made.
That was a theory I made, and then I did some IMDb digging, and Matt Dillon, the actor, said, hey, this guy gets away with everything. Like American Psycho style, if you've seen the movie, that like the cops are incompetent, he gets away without cleaning up anything to the point where it's comical. Is this all in his head? And apparently Lars Von Trier told him, yes, that's what I intended, but nothing in the movie points to it. I guess it's open-ended, but he never gets caught. In fact, right after he Sharpies the woman all the way back to the freezer, it starts raining. And in one fell swoop of weather, the entirety of the crime scene is cleaned up. All blood and guts are gone. He completely gets away with it.
We see a shot of the chunks of like
brain.
Skin and brain are like being like washed down the sewer. Just a clean slate, new day.
So this is about like 40 minutes into the movie, and I feel like if you've made it this far, then you're going to be somewhat prepared for the next couple incidences. After this awkward strangle of a kill, after this awkward flashback scene to him as a young boy when men are harvesting things with scythes, and I was like, what fucking year is this supposed to be? He does say, after each murder, my OCD began to diminish. Good for him.
And he says it's liberating. And then Peter made a joke. So for my Patreon, we often will do like a weekly win where people will post in the chat, like, an OCD win I had this week was I, like did blah, 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 or I went to this event, or I, did this exposure. And Peter made a joke saying, yeah, like this was my win of the week. I didn't, have to go back and clean up after the job, blah, 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 blah.
Everyone hits the like or the heart or the hug button.
Like, yay, you, like, you're killing it. Literally, no pun intended. Pun intended.
You go, girl. And then it's hysterical because he said an unintended benefit was that he actually ran a different unrelated lady over on the way back just because she was walking there. And the lady made for some good photographs of her dead body as an unexpected win on Jack's list of wins. So this movie then enters another like interlude scene where we're watching a bunch of like footage and stock images and whatnot. One thing this movie does is it's not afraid to bust out the graphs to make its weird abstract points. Lars Von Trier literally has this idea of a man walking in between street lamps animated and shown over and over again. I think the idea is that if you're underneath a lamp, you have no shadow and you're just doing what you're doing. But in between the street lamps, your shadow in front of you grows and your shadow behind you grows, and your attachment to the future and the attachment to the past grows. But those go away right when you're doing the next thing. And I'm like, oh my God, is Lars Von Trier describing the importance of being present? Like, that's huge. Is this movie like the best OCD movie?
Well, I also saw that as Jack is describing that kind of initial relief, or that initial kind of like wave of certainty and trust that can come. Let's say you're someone who struggles with like health OCD and you are really worried about some sort of, mole on your body, and you go to the dermatologist and you're so afraid. And then the dermatologist looks at the mole and they're like, no, actually you're good. And you have that wave of like, wow, I feel strong, I feel powerful, I am safe, nothing bad is going to happen. You've just done that compulsion, you're just feeling all that certainty. You go to walk out of the office and then immediately you have the next thought, but what if they're wrong? And then it all starts over again.
Yeah.
Or he's just describing the urges to kill as someone with like antisocial personality disorder, I suppose, could have.
It's possible that's not what this podcast is about. I feel like if you're
Yes.
looking for an actual murder podcast, you'll be able to find like one or two. It's not like it's every
Along with
other
the Patreon.
goddamn podcast.
Yes.
Okay, so this takes us to incident number 3. Parmesan face is not the worst thing to happen in this movie. I think it's between incident number 3 and incident number 4 are the worst things that happen in this movie. But hey, you listened this far, so let's dig into it.
This is also where OCD kind of stops being discussed.
Oh yeah.
Like, Like, this is where it goes from like, okay, maybe there was a little bit of like an OCD plot to none.
Years later, we can tell it's years later because he has a little mustache now. He is going on a hunting trip / a picnic with a new woman he is dating for at least some length of time because her 2 little children are there and they know him. And he is describing crow hunting and then crow culling, and describes the etymology of the term culling, and then kind of ties it into ethnic cleansing in front of 2 like 10-year-old boys. The lady pretty much wanted to go on a picnic, but no, let's have my weird boyfriend talk about culling and ethnic cleansing to my 2 small children. Again, another shining example of Lars Von Trier's perspective of women's intelligence. We should have asked this up front, but I have it written down in my notes. The question we should ask the podcast listener before listening to this podcast: how do you feel about sniping little children? Because that is what happens very shortly. After talking about culling and ethnic cleansing and how you should kill the youngest member of a herd before the older members of the herd, he then just walks up to a sniper tower and starts hunting the people that he came with. And in kind of an awkward cut, we don't know how it got from point A to point B.
Yeah, because they're sitting about to have lunch, and then the next thing you see is like the woman and her 2 children like cowering behind a little tree thing.
I feel like that scene would have been kind of important, but I guess not. Apparently, in the slightly longer cut, we actually see the bullets hit the little children.
Oh.
We watched the 147-minute version, not the 152 version.
And I want to just say too, I didn't know that 147 minutes was 2 hours and 30 minutes. So I was like, oh,
Around there.
how do we make sure we're watching the right version?
We had a math moment. After he snipes the little children, he then sets them up in a picnic and tries to feed the pie to the child's corpse in front of the mother, after which he then kills the mother and then lines up the dead bodies of both the children and the mother and then all of the crows he ended up culling. And then he said something along the lines of it being an art piece. Yes. And I wrote down, oh my goodness, lining them up isn't a compulsion, it's a value. So Jack, despite committing crimes against humanity, has really made some big steps in his OCD journey.
And we also see, like, OCD does not make a person into someone who's unsafe or who is dangerous or who is a bad person. He has OCD, this is a part of him, but he also has a lot of other things in the mix that are contributing to these really, really harmful behaviors.
I feel like if he made it this far into the podcast of all of our episodes, I don't know if like the disclaimer is necessary anymore.
I have to.
Yeah.
I have to.
We could also throw in another Nazis are bad.
They are. They definitely are.
Nazis are bad.
And also there was a lot of footage used from like graphic documentaries about the Holocaust. And I'm just like thinking, okay, imagine losing your life in some sort of like genocide, and then your spirit is, in the ether. And then you realize that like that footage is being used for some like art bros film that glorifies like that.
Wow. Art bro is a great term to use for Lars Von Trier.
Thank you.
Wow,
Thank you.
I like that.
Yeah, thanks.
He's an art bro. He's such a film bro.
Oh my gosh. So yeah, Nazis are bad. Genocide is bad.
OCD doesn't turn you into serial killer.
OCD doesn't make you a serial killer. Yeah, that was a wild incident.
It was funny because Virgil then says something along the lines of, love is your weakness, Jack. And I'm like, are you sure it's not the serial killing? I think he's fully embraced his serial killer name, Mr. Sophistication, at this point, which Juliet remarked sounds like a white rapper in the 90s that didn't quite take off.
Thank you.
Eminem just kind of stole Mr. Sophistication's thunder.
Maybe that was Eminem's like second option. Like he went to his producer and he was like, here's what I'm thinking of. Eminem or Mr. Sophistication? No more Marshall Mathers.
Yeah, what would Dr. Dre say to that? He's like, no, dude, pick another one. Okay, so now here we are at Incident 4. We've seen lots of different slideshows and more Gothic architecture and more Nazi footage, but now we're back to him and another love interest. And what follows is like kind of a cutesy romance movie moment. Do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, so as he's giving the story to Verge, he says, this is the person who I felt the closest connection with. Like, I am not capable of really having connections, of having, like, empathy. But if it ever would have happened, it would have been with her. Her name's Jacqueline. And he goes to visit her at her apartment, and she's presumably really frustrated or upset, and she's crying. And he's like, what's wrong? And she's like, I can't look at you. So then he proceeds to go into the other room, and he talks to her via their landline phones. And he's like, how about this? Is this better? And it was very Love is Blind.
It's like a moment where someone's hiding in a closet or a bathtub because they're so overwhelmed by what's going on. And then the person comes and joins them in the closet, bathtub, being like, I'll sit here with you until you're ready to come out. Like, it's one of those, like, kind of a corny TV moment where you'd see a lot of this in, like the 90s and 2000s, where if someone's trying to show their love or like get down to their level, and like this is a weirdly sweet moment, being like, how about we talk like this, in phones that don't work because they're not connected, but like they're having a cute little moment. The moment stops being cute pretty soon after that. We find out that after he calms her down, this is not about him being a serial killer. She's not aware of that at the moment. This is about something else, probably related to the fact that his name for her is Simple. He nicknamed his girlfriend Simple. So right off the bat, we know this is a great relationship, very healthy. He starts grilling her about the differences between an architect and an engineer.
And a tiger and a lion.
It gave very big vibes of a 20-something-year-old dude going, oh, you like Nirvana, name 3 songs. And this kind of weird incel-y energy really reaches a peak when he straight up turns into Tucker Carlson. He starts saying shit like, well, I can't say anything these days. He talks about how, like, the roles of man and woman and how men should just be men. Like, the woman said, like, nothing to prompt this conversation.
Says, can we have a normal conversation?
And now he's like, I can't say anything these days, which is funny because this was still assumably shot in 2016, where the whole, like, woke thing wasn't so common in right-wing media, you know? So I guess Lars Von Trier was the proto-Tucker Carlson. I'd like to remind everybody that Dylan said that Lars cast him because he seems closest to Lars. And that Lars, in Matt Dillon's quote, says, Lars is the character, except he doesn't kill people. That's Lars about himself.
Wow.
In a very Jeffrey Dahmer kind of way, apparently this was inspired by Jeffrey Dahmer. His girlfriend runs out of the building, goes up to a cop, begs for help, and the cop doesn't help her and gives her back, hey, buddy, scrape up your girlfriend and take her inside or something, like, you know?
After Jack literally says, she's right, everything she's saying is true, I have killed 60 people, I am Mr. Sophistication, the cop's response is, get him together, bring him inside, give him some water, he's drunk. Yeah,
right, you're both drunk, go inside. I gotta hand it to this movie, there are actually some very genuinely funny moments, and that was a genuinely funny moment.
It was so absurd.
It was so absurd. So soon after, we get to one of the rougher parts of this movie, where he outlines with a Sharpie the parts of her that he wants to remove in an act of butchery.
Those parts are her boobs.
Thank you. I can say boob on a podcast. I don't know why I skirted around that. Anyway, one of the boobs he puts on the windshield of a car. The other boob he turns into a wallet. Now, At this point in the story, the narrator, or Virgil, or Verge, as he's so lovingly called, pretty much says, hey, I feel like all the women in your story are exceptionally dumb. Is there a reason for this? I feel like your attitudes are misogynistic. Like, literally calls him out for these behaviors. So that's another point in the is this satire direction. But the thing is, satire is supposed to kind of know, or else the satire doesn't work. Mm-hmm. But you can't engineer satire to appease every single person so that they understand, because then the comedy is lost. But the thing is, this, to even the most savvy of media consumers, it's unclear if we're supposed to think that Lars thinks this dude is super cool or not. Anyway, so more stock footage and images. Jack tries to build a house and then fails for like the third time, so I said this movie should be renamed Jack Refuses to Buy a House.
Well, it's also like he builds like the first quarter of the house, and then it's not right, so he has to redo it and start over. And that had some OCD pieces of like nothing feeling like good enough. He's looking for the right material, is what he keeps saying.
Ah, yes, he's looking for the right building material. Then we see some more Hitler footage, because, you know, why not?
Quite a lot. Then the fifth incident.
Yes, the fifth incident. This incident is not as dark as it is...
weird.
Kind of hysterical.
It's so...
This is where the movie just kind of stops pretending to be a normal movie. Not that it did before. But we're in the end game now of this movie.
And it's like 12:30 by this point. Like, it's late. As in, we've already been watching for like 2 hours.
Yes, this is a 2.5 hour movie, and Julia and I had to stop and make an OCD board and talk about this movie a bunch of times. So, he goes into a gun store with his boob wallet, and who comes out but the actor that plays Daniel Faraday in Lost, which Juliet, who has been watching Lost, clocked immediately. So proud of you, Juliet.
I know him. Yes. And he played the same character, too. Like, very similar mannerisms.
Absolutely. He might as well have been Daniel Faraday just at his side job at a gun store.
Time travel didn't work for him anymore, so he had to
not anymore.
Settle for the Pacific Northwest gun community.
Of which there is a big one. And he buys ammunition. The certain kind of ammunition is known as Full Metal Jacket. And he goes back to the walk-in freezer where he has lined up what must be 7 or 8 male victims. I think he got pissed off that Verge told him that he was being misogynistic. So if we're going with the theory that he made everything up, I think he changed the victims in his head to be men to go, look at me, I kill men too. I'm an equal opportunity murderer. He lines them all up with their heads all in the same axis to try and kill them all with one bullet, like he's playing fucking Call of Duty and wants that achievement where you kill several people with one bullet. And he goes through a lot of effort to try and do this. I was looking at the Reddit discussion of this movie, and the top comment was, did anyone else kind of want to see that shot, though? So, as I just implied, he tries for a while to work it out. Turns out he got the wrong kind of ammo. So he goes back and he yells at Daniel Faraday. And to find the correct bullet, he goes all the way to this trailer to this character that we have not met. And I looked at Julie like, have we met this fucking character? And she goes, no. Like, I have no idea who this is. It is some old man that has some connection to all of this, who is like also on to him, you know?
But he's on to him for like other things. Like, he thinks he's been stealing.
A lot of like unrelated robberies in this movie.
Yes.
So, yeah, he claims he robbed somebody and then calls the police on him at gunpoint. So this is how he fucking gets caught. So he leaves, I think after he kills the guy, right? Okay.
Yes, and then he kills the police officer, too.
And then he kills the police officer. He also takes the red robe, because if we're not going to underline the Dante's Inferno thing quite enough, he's going to start wearing this long, flowing red robe. He goes back to the walk-in freezer, and he tries and fails to make that Call of Duty achievement shot. I should have had this theory earlier. Like, there's no way any of this is real, based on how inept the police are. Verge shows up physically. Yes. It's not just a voiceover anymore. Little old man shows up and starts asking questions that the viewer has been asking the whole ass movie. Like, wasn't Jack going to build a house? He basically says, like, without saying it, wasn't the title of the film The House That Jack Built?
Yeah, what have you been doing getting sidetracked with these murders?
Yeah, and so Jack goes, oh, fuck, you're right. Oh shit, the cops are surrounding me. What material do I have to build a house with? And he looks around himself, and he sees all the frozen dead bodies, the taxidermied bodies that he's built up over this 2.5-hour movie. And he turns it into the house that Jack built, all the stiff frozen bodies. Now, at this point, he never makes that Call of Duty shot, so all the other dudes are still lined up, tied up, watching him build a house out of frozen dead bodies, talking to nobody. And they're all like, what's going on, if they haven't succumbed to hypothermia yet. At that point, after he makes the house, this is where the movie stops remotely, not trying. What do you say the movie stops doing?
Well, just the whole plot thread that they've been trying to take us on, it's like, okay, when you're coloring and you're coloring like a raspberry, so you're using lots of different red crayons, and then you get distracted and you pull out another crayon, you think it's like the light pink and you start drawing, but it's like yellow and it's like completely different than everything that came before. And then it's like, you're like, well, and then you decide to draw like a sun instead. Like you just abandon the whole plot. It was like that because
I feel like you got this analogy because you recently did a paint by numbers and texted me a picture of it. I'm doing one right now
too. I'm working on it right before, when I said I needed 5 more minutes, I needed to finish the section I was working on.
I thought you needed to set up podcast equipment. Like, no, you really got to color in this thing. And you needed the extra 5 minutes because you thought it was going to be pink, but no, it was yellow.
So it takes a turn downward, literally, into hell.
Yes. It starts kind of as a cave diving, first person, 127 hours type video, a first person video.
It's like a GoPro video.
It's like a GoPro video where, okay, sorry, we got off track. From the walk-in freezer, a hole magically appears. They get in the hole, under the house of bodies that Jack built. And they climb down. The police are out of the story now.
The whole other plot is out of the story now.
Nothing else matters in
just
this.
Going down.
Like maybe there's a callback to like his obsessions with photo negatives. Like that comes back once. Apart from that, we're in a different movie now.
We are.
We are now in Dante's Inferno. And Virgil is leading Dante, down a cave. They're like knee deep in water. And something happens and it cuts to a literal Renaissance painting where they're all posing in flowing robes, and it sits there for like on a boat.
Like 20 seconds.
I think it's supposed to be Karen's boat. It goes for a while, and then they descend deeper. They get to a lower part of hell. By the way, after the boat or before the boat, they're traveling in like Glinda bubbles from Wicked.
Well, it goes straight. There's the Glinda bubble bit, and then it goes straight to this like GoPro cave. Cave clip.
We're getting our order of operations mixed up because I don't know how hell transportation works in the Lars Von Trier mixed mythology universe. But eventually they do make it by Renaissance painting boat and Glinda bubble all the way down to a place where there is straight up lava.
This is like the hell, like the lowest level.
This is the hell. And I asked Juliet, did you think that in this movie about a serial killer with OCD, we'd be seeing lava? And she's like, I can't say that I did. Now, Virgil says, I'm not supposed to drop you off here. I'm supposed to drop you off a couple levels up. Like, this is really bad hell. I'm like, after all the child sniping and the child taxidermy and the cutting of the boob, he's a couple levels up? Like, what's down here?
That's so Lars, because I think Lars, throughout the whole movie, Jack is trying to justify all of these murders by saying that he was creating art in each kill. And I see that as Lars trying to justify Jack's actions and say, oh, it's not that bad.
But now he is in hell.
The base hell.
Bottom floor hell. I think this hell, if I'm remembering Dante correctly, it's like right before you get back into heaven or out into the real world again, and it's reserved for like treachery, the Judases of the world. But he sees the exit to heaven and says, hey, Verge, what's over there? And Verge says, oh, that's the door out of hell. This is actually was what happens in the Divine Comedy. They have to go through hell to get to heaven. I don't know why there's a back door to heaven at the bottom of hell, but that's how it was designed. And he says, can I go over there? And he goes, like, I'm not going to stop you or some shit. Like,
yeah, he's like, I'm not going to stop you, but no one's made it before.
Yes. If you need a description of what this base hell looks like, think Lord of the Rings in Mount Doom. Juliet hasn't seen it, but it's essentially like that. It's just lava and rocks everywhere.
It's also like Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
Yeah, that's also a good one. He starts climbing his way there because the bridge is out, so he has to climb all the way around. He's bouldering straight up all the way to the exit of hell.
In his cape.
In his red flowing cape. He then, and Lars Von Trier actually called this a classical ending. I don't know why.
How profound.
He calls this a classical ending. He falls into hell. It cuts to black. Well, no, first it switches to like, oh, look, it's about the photo negatives or something. And then it cuts to credits over Hit the Road, Jack by Ray Charles.
Yes.
And that is the story of the house that Jack built. I can't tell if this movie was more pretentious than it was offensive, or the other way around.
I think it's like equal.
I was actually genuinely scared that I was going to be very bored watching this when watching with Juliet.
It wasn't bored.
It was not boring.
Yes.
And it dealt with OCD more than Trap dealt with OCD for a serial killer.
Quite a lot.
It dealt with OCD better than some of the things
Better than as good as it gets.
Better than as good as it gets.
I think so. I mean, like, yes, Melvin was an asshole. Yes, Jack. Melvin? Marlon? What was his name again?
How could you forget? Our arch nemesis name is Melvin.
Oh, yeah, Melvin. That's what I said. Melvin, asshole. Jack, asshole and serial killer and awful, awful person. But the OCD piece. I bought it more than I bought Melvin's.
Does Melvin remain our antagonist for this podcast? Like, we're down with Jack a little bit more because Jack really stuck to those NERs, you know?
I gotta think on that.
Not even Monk did NERs and exposures.
No.
Monk never said maybe, maybe not.
Monk avoided.
So much avoidance, so much reassurance. Like, honestly, Jack used the tools. So, here we are. I have seen a couple Lars Von Trier movies. This is not the most graphic one.
Are you thinking of Nymphomaniac? Because he did that.
He did Nymphomaniac. He also did Antichrist, and Antichrist is probably his most graphic film. There's a lot he's done, though, so it's possible that he's gone even wilder. But yeah, so if you've made it this far, maybe you're curious about watching The House That Jack Built. You can. That is a thing you physically can do, and I can't say we didn't have a great time watching it, because we did.
We did it. We watched it. We came. We saw. We were not disappointed in the entertainment. And if you've stuck it out for this whole episode, this is like pretty much half the length of the movie. So, you know, you can watch the movie.
So I kind of really want to hear your OCD representation out of 10.
Okay. Da-da-da-da. I think I'm giving it 6 out of 10. For the OCD. Yeah.
6 out of 10 for the OCD.
It was decent. Like, it was decent. They did a, like I said, decent job. I just did not like the fact that he was also a serial killer, and that was like the main part of the movie. Like, I would have loved it if maybe there was something else he did that might have been, like, maybe if he was like, I don't know. Yeah, I'd say 6 out of 10.
Okay.
Yeah, what about, well, you don't do those, but.
I don't do the OCD thing, but I'm not the biggest Lars Von Trier guy. I'm not the biggest Harmony Korine, Lars Von Trier, I'm a filmmaker against the whole world of storytelling. I'm going to tell my weird little stories with bizarre plot structures to fringe audiences. Like, that's not necessarily my speed. I think also, like, come on, dude. Like, half the shit that he says and does, like, I can't deny that things like Dogma 95 and some of the stuff that he does are influential to the art world. They are influential to the art world, and they're influential to film as an art form. It's just, those kinds of movies are not necessarily my cup of tea. That being said, I did enjoy this more than I thought I was going to.
Me too.
So, I think the next move is to start an Instagram account for Jack. The profile picture will be him holding up the OCD card. And we're just going to start getting him on the trends, you know? Maybe he can speak at the IOCDF in Chicago this year.
WWJD, what would Jack do?
What would Jack do? What would Jack do? Because Jack's got it down. Jack's ready to start giving back to the OCD community after all that he's learned.
I think he is, yeah. Coming straight from hell. You know, his core fear, maybe.
I think he was actually pretty down with hell, the idea of hell. He was like, oh, I'll check this out, yeah.
You're right, I misspoke. I should not assume. It goes to show, you know, you can never assume someone's core fear. And this is why, you know, when we do blanket level exposures just on whatever the, you know, the topical obsession is, it doesn't always work because we got to get down, you know, below the surface. And maybe we'll crack that later.
Yeah. But for now, we're going to hit the road, Jack.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Intrusive Plots. I'm Juliet. I'm an OCD therapist. I have a Patreon account where I make like more specific OCD content, and I also have a really awesome, like wholesome OCD support community over there. You can also find me on Instagram under OCD therapist Juliet.
I'm Peter. I wrote and directed a thriller about OCD called Exposure. You can find it streaming now. It's not even like renting now. Now it's just streaming on Amazon and, well, congratulations to the people that don't have to rent it anymore. It's just on Amazon. You have to like watch some ads or whatnot. I think you can find it on like Tubi or whatnot.
Oh my goodness. Congratulations.
Sure. Follow us on Instagram at intrusive_plots. Let us know what films you'd like to see us review next. Follow my other film exploits at Debut Film Mistakes to hear all my hot takes on first-time feature directors' films. And yeah, we will see you very soon.
See ya.
See ya. Bye.